Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 7th chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. Made it all the way up to the first 14 verses. We're going to take this from 15 all the way home through 29. Now, this is the densest concentration of wisdom, of the words wisdom and wise in this book of wisdom literature. Proverbs 8 enjoys that distinction, as does Job 28 in the other two books of wisdom literature. In the first 14 verses, the ones we've already covered are written in poetry, more specifically Proverbs. What we're going to read is prose today, but the proverb, to remind you, is a condensed saying of a concise saying of condensed wisdom. They really pack a punch. The author of Proverbs cultivates what the author Ernest Hemingway called the iceberg effect. So if you look at an iceberg, there's a lot. There's not so much on the surface, but what lurks below is substantially larger. So the compiler or the composer of proverb must say much while saying little on the surface. So there is a really real economy of words, and if the theme of the verses we're going to review, and that we already did in a separate lesson, is the benefits and superiority of wisdom, which is indicated by the word better. Part of wisdom consists in knowing what's better, what's best, and why it's better than any of the alternative. But the section we're going to cover today is the limitations of wisdom, the sobering limitations of wisdom. Wisdom can do a lot of things, but these are the things it can't do. We're going to read some of the things it can do before. So the first verse, remember, pay attention to the word better. A name is better than precious oil in the day of death and the day of one's birth. A name is more than a name. It is a character. It is someone's essential nature. And a precious oil is not necessarily precious oil. It is any luxury item that can be bought. What cannot be bought, what you cannot put a price on, is better than anything you can put a price on. No amount of precious oil can compensate or be superior to a good name, good reputation, and good character. Day of death and the day of one's birth. Now, we Christians look at this from, we know that when we die, we are united with Christ. So, of course, we know that the day of our death is better than the day of one's birth. And much of the words that we read have echoes what we read of in the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, the 7 paired stanzas, the 14 opposites compared and contrasted in 7 verses 2 through 8. So that's verse 1, a time to die and a time to be born, and of these Solomon declares the latter to be the superior. But in between those days we can cultivate a name, and to have a name that stinks is to fail at life. It is better to go to the house of mourning than go to the house of feasting, so that the end of all man and the living take it to heart. Feasting is dancing in Ecclesiastes 3, but mourning is always there, and the wise gravitate around funerals and mourning. The wise think about their death, they prepare for their death, and if you are not prepared to die, you are not prepared to live. If you're not prepared to die, you cannot live with wisdom. So part of wisdom consists in recognizing, confronting the idea of death, the fact of death, the reality of death, and spending more time. You're going to learn more about life in the funeral house, than you will at the party. That is to know nothing more than an ephemeral benefit. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the face the heart becomes better. A time to weep and a time to laugh. Of these Solomon declares sorrow, crying, and weeping to be superior for the ways of wisdom than laughing. Laughing can admire, some admittedly intellectually sophisticated absurdities, but we learn more about ourselves. In wisdom, sorrow is the price that we pay for wisdom. As early as the 18th, he who increases in knowledge increases in grief. 18th verse, 1st chapter. So we know that we are wise if we are, we're not wise to become miserable, but it's only to say that the life of wisdom does not necessarily make one happier. The heart of the wise is in the house of the mourning, for a reason we already explained. House of fools, they gravitate towards the rejoicing, the party scene. Verse 5, it is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for the man to hear the song of the fools. Better to hear the gentle, compassionate, and loving criticisms and stings of a friend who knows how to hurt a friend. This is the sign of a wise friend. Than to hear the flattery of fools, the song, to be praised by fools. What does that mean? These are foolish people. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know who they're talking to. Whereas a friend is wise enough to notice things that we do not know, and they will rebuke us for our defects, which are not obvious to us, and they will let us know. And that is better to be wounded by a friend than the kisses of an enemy. Now, much of these proverbs are unlike anything we read in Proverbs, but this one has a parallel in Proverbs 17:10. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Verse 8, so the essence of hope is that it will get better, it can get better, and it must get better. All things will work out in the end. So the promise and the promise of hope and the essence of hope is what it allows one to say the end of a matter is better than its beginning. Life is not easy, but all things will work out in the end, and the best things in life are worth waiting for. Nothing is better in life than eternal salvation. So we have to endure the race with patience and not pride. Now, if we are prideful, we will want what we want when we want it and not be willing to wait for it, not be willing to work for it, not to develop the patience that is needed to get the most to get the best, because wisdom is knowing what's best and why it's better. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For it is wise of you to have asked about these. So the wise do not say that the former days are better than these. The wise live in the present with an eye towards the future, mindful of the past, but they are not imprisoned by the past. They do not have the illusory nostalgia of the good old days, which quite frankly never existed. This is a sign of intellectual maturity to want to long for and live for the past. Maybe they had a happier childhood than they do now, but they have to recognize the fact that life goes on and you cannot live anywhere but the present. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. Wisdom is the most beneficial dowry we can leave our children. If we can inherit them and connect them to the tradition of wisdom, then they will have their footsteps in the path that we have read, and at the advantages of those who see the sun. So with wisdom is the wise walk in light, fools walk in darkness. With wisdom comes perception, perspective, and just the ability to navigate skillfully through life. So even though wisdom cannot prevent the day of the death while we are here, life is better. It is an obvious advantage. The wise has a self-evidently superior life to the fool. For wisdom protects as silver protects, but the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. The ultimate advantage of wisdom is life. This is not longevity of life, because as we read in this section we're going to cover today, he sees the righteous dying young, the good dying young, and the bad living long. But the life that he speaks of is not necessarily quantitative, the measured in years, longevity, but qualitative. The life of wisdom will not necessarily add life to your years. Years to your life, but it will add life to your years. Verse 15, I have seen it all in the days of futility. There is a righteous one perishing in his righteousness, and there is a wicked one living long in his evil. So the good are dying young, while the evil are prospering in this life and in this world. This is an inversion of justice from the eyes of sight. We don't have to go far in the Bible to witness an invalidation of the promise that righteousness will add life to your years as soon as you get to Abel. So the fact of life now, to die in one's perishing in righteousness is far, far better than perishing in one's sins, because the wicked one, though they live long, they too must perish one day, eventually and inevitably. And if they're living in sin, then they're going to die in sin, and it will not end well for you. So not how long we live, but how we live is the ultimate measuring rod of a successful life. Do not be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? Over righteous, over wise. I thought righteousness and wisdom were two things we could not get enough of. But, the Bible doesn't say do not seek wisdom, do not get wisdom. It says do not be wise in your own eyes. Isaiah 5, Proverbs 3:7, other places. And over righteousness, this is to be inflated. This is to be self-righteous. It's to be so convinced of your own righteousness that you start playing religious detective, and in your pursuit to notice these sins in others, you become blind to your own defects and you self-destroy yourself. So when you have a holier-than-thou judgmental attitude, that's when you are over-righteous and you are on the path of self-destruction. Self-righteousness is almost synonymous, not quite interchangeable, with hypocrisy. But being wise in your own sight, thinking you know what's best, thinking that your own wisdom apart from God, which is flawed and unreliable, can get you through the day is a sure road to self-destruction. Do not be increasingly wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? So from one extreme to the opposite extreme, he's in the first extreme is don't be too righteous, don't be too wise. We already clarified, don't be self-righteous and be not wise in your own eyes. But now he's saying righteous and wise don't be on the other extreme of them. These are good things, just don't think you have enough. But don't avoid it altogether. So don't be inexorably living in a continuum of sin, which gets worse and worse and worse. And do not be a fool. The fool lacks the security of the wise that he mentioned of earlier. And the life of a fool, if the wicked can live long, the fool is certainly less likely to. They're bound to do something stupid. They're bound to die prematurely through their own fault, whereas the righteous perish through no fault of their own. It is good that you should take hold of this, and also not withhold your hand from the other, for he who fears God comes forth with all them. So he's telling them not to take hold of this. He earlier says, do not think of these things, do not long for the good old days, the illusory nostalgia for a life that never was. And here he's saying, seek balance between the extremes. You have to find the golden mean between the two extremes, from being so wise and so righteous in your own eyes that you are not what you claim, and being in the middle between having none of these things at all and just not seeking or cultivating them. So life consists in balance. It's good to have a healthy assessment of our own moral and intellectual worth. It is dangerous for a man to think more highly of himself than he ought, but it is equally dangerous of a man not to think of himself less than God does. But fearing God is what wisdom all boils down to. This is the axiomatic assumption of wisdom literature, though the connection is never made in Ecclesiastes. It is in the Wisdom Psalm 11:10, Proverbs 1:7, 9:10, 15:33, Job 28:28. But he does say, the author of Ecclesiastes' conclusion in verse 13 sums it down to fear God and obey his commandments. And this is the wisdom is, you don't need me to tell you how that is wise, because the wisdom derives from an omniscient being. The omniscience is the attribute of infinite or unlimited intelligence. So when we describe God as wise, it is not nearly a strong enough adjective, yet he can make us wise. Wisdom makes the wise strong, more than 10 rulers that are in the city. Wisdom wields superior force. It is a more valuable and damaging weapon. It can make physically weak people strong. It is a source of strength that can protect them and crush their enemies. So having wisdom at your disposal is more useful than armies or just 10 rulers in a city. For there is not a righteous man on the earth who does good and does not sin. That is the sobering truth. This is a sobering and somber reminder of the doctrine of universal depravity. There is none good, no, not one. None of us are righteous in ourselves. Our righteousness, our best works on our best days are likened to, or our self-righteousness is likened to as filthy rags before the one who is without blemish. Isaiah 64:6. None have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Romans 3:23. There is none good, no, not one. These are other verses. 1 Kings 8:46. But what he says here is to not be over righteous, to remind yourself that there is no one who is righteous. There is no one who completely honors and obeys the obligations of the law. Remember, he's an old covenant Jew, and but our sinlessness necessitates our salvation, and in the ultimate and final analysis, the only thing that we end up contributing to our salvation is the sin that we are being saved from. Also, do not take to heart all the words they speak, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Don't be so wrapped up in gossip or what anyone else is saying, and what other people say about you or think about you is none of your business. Wisdom consists in recognizing this fact. But some things, if some of my friends gossip about me, who cares? I don't need to know that stuff. So let's see. For you know in your heart that many times you have cursed others. Don't demean other people who gossip, because that is something that we all do. Everyone thinks in the United States of America the sins of abortion and homosexuality are inviting divine judgment. It's gossip, if anything else. That is something that even Christians do, and it's ugly and disgusting, and it's bearing false witness and testimony. It is in violation of the Decalogue. But don't criticize others for doing the same things you do, or even different things than you do. The danger is to hate the sins that you don't do, but love the sins that you do. We need to hate the sins that we do with at least as much passion and intensity as the sins that we don't do. All this I have proved by wisdom. I said I am wise, but it was far from me. If any man living or historical could make the claim to be wise, Solomon was certainly that one. He was the wisest man in the central figure in the Hebrew wisdom tradition. Jesus Christ accepted the wisest man who ever lived. But it was still not enough for him, because the wiser we become, the more aware of our ignorance we become. The more diligent we seek and ponder and contemplate the mysteries of the universe and the mysteries of salvation, the more humbly aware we become of our own vacancy of knowledge. There is so much we do not know. We become confronted with things that are beyond our power to comprehend, far less control, and this has a humbling effect. And humility is foundational to wisdom. It is the side effect, and it is also the root of wisdom. It's a simultaneous overlap, those two forces. That which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it? There are things that are beyond our capacity, that were never meant for us to know. The exceeding depth, what we cannot know the future. We cannot even know the past outside of the history we record it. But other than that, our memory is fickle. So this is just an exposure of the finitude of human cognitive capacities by way of contrast. What is exceedingly deep to us is known instantly, totally, and thoroughly by God, who keeps the secrets. In Proverbs 25:2, it is the glory of God to keep a secret, but the glory of kings to search it out. I have turned round even my heart to know and to search and to seek out wisdom and a conclusion, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. Solomon has the mindset of the student, the scholar, and the scientist. He has an observational an experimental ethos. He's willing to go in there and experiment through personal observation, really get into this thing, search it out by every available means necessary, including evaluating and assessing the relative merits of wickedness and folly in light of wisdom and righteousness. So he did not, when he experimented in the things that he indulges in the second chapter of Ecclesiastes, the first 3 verses, the wine, the laughter, the rejoicing, he is not seeking to escape, but to discover. So he does have a balanced and thorough assessment of the relative worth and merits of wickedness and folly and all the rest, foolishness and madness. I have found more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are shackles. He who pleases God escapes from her, but the sinner is captured by her. Solomon has scarce a kind word to say about adulteresses. He likens one here to a hunter with devices. Her seductive techniques are analogous to snares and nets, which lure fools in, sinners who have no resistance to her snares. But Solomon was implicitly able to resist such a one, but he also had a harem of 300 women and 700 wives, not all of whom he would have had sexual relationships. But it is a mark and measure for us, and as much as him, if we escape a seductress who is trying to seduce us into the sin of fornication, that gives God pleasure. But the sinner is captured by her because the sinner walks by sight, not by faith. They see the attractive woman and they just have to have her, but they do not see the consequences, the invisible spiritual consequences of succumbing to her snares. And the sinner, they're happy, but they're not going to be when in the end. See, this I have found out, says Quoleth, one by one, to find a conclusion. Quoleth is the Hebrew word translated as teacher or preacher, so in him church and state are united as one. It is certainly an unusual title for a king, but Solomon was a sage and a king. He was a polymath who made advances in several epistemological subjects, biology, zoology, plenty of other things, and his wisdom was greater, exceedingly greater than any contemporary or historical or future wise man of the East, and he has the experimental ethos. He's really getting into this thing. So he searches, he engages, he experiments, and then only after then does he form his conclusion. But all the while he knows that he is working himself up to a conclusion. That is why he is on this quest for satisfaction. Ecclesiastes is the story of a man on a quest for the satisfaction which eludes him. Watch my soul still seeks out, but I have not found. I have found one man among 1,000, but a woman among these I have not found. So he's looking for a wise or a wise man or woman, and this is not a misogynistic statement. It's just that women lack the religious education as men back then. But Solomon does speak highly of women. He speaks highly of married love in Ecclesiastes 9:9. He personifies wisdom herself in female form in the book of Proverbs, chapters 1 and 8, and also has much to say about the blessings and benefits of married love. So he does have a healthy perspective of wisdom, but I'll just lighten the humor with a joke. A man and a woman arrive at heaven they both die at the same time, and they are both past the judgment, are escorted into heaven by St. Peter, and the man receives a palace, but the woman receives a mansion, and the man is livid at this. This man notes that all the inequalities between men and women on earth, why is heaven no different? So he protests to St. Peter, and St. Peter goes, hey, new guy, you haven't been here that long. We got plenty of women here, but you're our first man. Now the laughter may or may not have subsided. Final verse, truly this is only I have found, that God made man straight, but they have sought out many devices. God didn't make man sinful or neutral. He made them straight and upright. And in the garden, we did have pristine paradise. But, the serpent spread his seduction and snare. And ever since then, man has been a schemer. So their corrupt nature is constantly scheming, constantly plotting, constantly conceiving and executing devices that can help them get what they want by any means necessary, but it's ultimately part of the corrupt and fallen sinful nature. But the point is that God is not to be blamed. Man is to be blamed for the way that we have wired ourselves, because God wired us correctly. And part of wisdom consists in not blaming God for what we ourselves are responsible for. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.